Okay, so today we're going to spend some time talking about the first retirement plan that comes up in the textbook here, and it's also the most common. Oftentimes when people talk about their retirement, they're usually going back to, okay, well, what is my 401k doing? All right, so the purpose here is that we're going to discuss kind of the basics of what a 401k plan is, what it's not, and then there are some different types of plans that are 401k compliant that we'll also touch on. So kind of the high points, at least at this point in time, 401k is considered a qualified retirement plan. Okay, so it's a retirement vehicle. It's not necessarily meant to be any, used for, health care or to borrow money from it. That you can, do some of these things. It's meant to be a retirement plan. Okay, as of right now, individuals can put up to $19,500 into their 401k per year. Not many can just forget about 20 grand every year, but some can, and that's something that's afforded to them. It often, though not always, comes with some type of matching scheme from the employer. It could be, we'll match 5%, or up to 5% of your salary for every dollar you put in. We might match, half of what you put in up to 5% of your salary. So there are a few matching schemes that different employers will look, and that's one thing that employees should keep in mind when they're looking at new jobs. It's not always about the pay, and we know that all too well in this class that it's not just about the salary. It offers employees tax deferred withdrawals. So what happens? You're paying in, this year, but you're not paying tax. So if you put $19,500 in your 401k for this year, that is not taxable income for you. You won't get taxed until you withdraw. Okay, so what that really means is over the time when we're accruing this interest or investing the funds in the 401k, that interest is essentially tax free. Okay, so there are a number of advantages to 401k plans. Okay, and these aren't specific to 401k plans, so some of these we can also see when it comes down to IRAs and things like that. Okay. Now, as far as implementing it, and this is kind of from an employer's side. So for an employer, the best things we want to look at here, things about the employer, they can't be a tax exempt employer. They can't double dip. So most government institutions are not going to offer 401ks. They could offer 403bs, 457bs, or more likely a type of pension through the federal government. If the employer wants to provide low expense retirement plan, these things are, 401ks are very common. They're not super complicated to set up. Okay, there are funding requirements though. We'll discuss that at the end of the chapter here. Okay, and then if we want kind of this savings type of vehicle for retirement, and a lot of employees will think about retirement. Now, whether or not they contribute to it is another thing entirely. But giving that option on the table is something that can often help with things like recruiting or retention. Okay, so for employees, when is this best? So if they want some choice as to level of savings, so they can always go for an IRA. They can always just put it in their savings or checking account and get a whopping 0.5% interest if that's something they so desire. So it's another savings element. Okay, if you're young and if you start soon, you get those interest-free accruals over time, and they just keep stacking, keep stacking, and keep stacking. If you can start when you're 22 or 23, even just putting in 2 to 5%, that's going to pay dividends in the future. If you're 50 or 55 and you're just starting to save for retirement, then you might have to work a little bit longer than you want to, or you might have to look for other ways to kind of pad that retirement or post-retirement income, or maybe you shouldn't retire. Um, Employers are also going to accept some degree of investment risk, so there's no guarantee. So we can look at average market returns for most 401ks. It's safe to say within 6 to 10% range. Most rules of thumbs just say 10%. I personally think that that's probably a little on the optimistic side, and it's best to err on the side of caution. So there is some investment risk here, and then you do have choices in this, right? You could use your own risk appetite to allocate these assets that or your money into these assets as you see fit. Okay, so it's not necessarily that everyone accepts the exact same type of risk. No, there's some choice in 401ks. So what are some of the pros and cons, or advantages and disadvantages? So advantages, number one, the tax deferred savings are huge. So having that kind of as a way to not pay taxes now and just kind of defer it into the future is really a nice thing, especially if you think that tax rates might be lower in the future. Now, as of right now, with the current tax cuts from this year or last year up until 2025, we probably won't see taxes being much lower than they are now. But it's going to depend on your marginal bracket, what your income levels are. Okay, so that's one thing that we can kind of keep in mind. Okay, so that tax deferral is nice. Now, if you have a Roth variant, that's post-tax, your distributions are tax free at the end of it, and you still get the interest accrual there. Okay, you get a degree of choice. How much do you want to put in there, and how do you want to invest your 401k funds? So that kind of choice, a lot of people like that autonomy. So it's good for employees. Employer deduction can be up to 25% of total payroll. So you can't just say we're going to pay everyone in 401k contributions and deduct all of it, and we don't make any money, so we don't pay any taxes. Okay, that's not going to work. Okay, so there's a cap on that. It can be mostly funded by employee salary reduction. So you, as an employer, you don't have to match. Now, if you don't match, you're going to be behind the curve, and you might need to be paying a little more in salary or other type of benefits, but you don't have to match. Okay, it's not unheard of for employers not to match anything. Okay. There are also a number of 401k plans that offer hardship withdrawals. So a hardship could be, damage to your home. It could be disability, though long-term disability contracts usually supersede hardship withdrawals, but there are a number of reasons that we can withdraw early with no major penalty. Okay, I'm not saying no penalty, but no major penalty. All right, so what are we missing out? So kind of the disadvantages here. So, individuals have to use these 401k plans for them to be worthwhile. Just to say I have a 7% match from my employer, which would be better than average, to say I have a 7% match from my employer doesn't mean anything if I'm not putting a penny into it, right? If I put in zero, a match of zero is still zero. Okay, so we find that a number of people, for many reasons, are not adequately saving for retirement. Now some of that could just be lack of retirement funds or funding for retirement. In other words, they don't make enough money to put it aside, and that's unfortunate, right? But there are some that have the ability to save for retirement and they just choose not to, and that's their own risk management choice. But we would argue that's a poor choice. Okay, employee contributions are limited. Now you might think, all right, well, who could or who would want to put almost $20,000 a year? And this hasn't changed, so it's 19.5 for 2021 as well. Who can put that aside? Well, many people do. Okay, if you're making really more than, let's say, 150 to $200,000 a year, which again you're getting kind of to that top like 5% range for individuals. But if you're making that much money and you want to put in 10, 15, or 20% to retirement, you can't. Okay, you can't do that. If you're making 150 a year, then you need to put 30,000, a year to get up to the 20%. Well, you can't do that if you're just limited to a 401k plan. Okay, so you can't always hit those kind of benchmarks. You have to look for other avenues. Okay, that might bear more risk or might not be considered part of a compensation package. And then, speaking of risk, the employees do bear risk under this plan before and after retirement, because what happens, you still have this accumulated set of assets. So your 401k funds, you're investing in them, stocks, bonds, money market, what have you, all those have an inherent risk in them. And if you don't shift that over after retirement, because your risk preferences are going to change when you retire, and you're going to slowly get more risk averse, most people do, as they age, especially with their retirement investment. So as your risk preference change, if you don't change your portfolio of risk, okay, then you could set yourself up to have a huge loss. Okay, could be a huge loss, right? So you need to be safe there. All right, so that's kind of the pros and cons. So let's talk about a few of the design features. We'll go through each of these, how salary reductions work, how employer contributions work, some average, kind of a breakdown there, plan distribution. So when and how can someone or you get paid once you put into this, and then we'll discuss at length a little more about hardship withdrawals. Okay, so salary reductions then. So generally what happens here, this just comes out of your paycheck, and that's probably the best way to do it. When you first start your new job, or you have a client who's just starting a new job and they're worrying about retirement, it's best to go ahead and set up your retirement first and foremost, right? So if you want to put in, that 5% each time, you want to do it as soon as possible so that you never miss that 5%. Okay, so if you want to put in $10,000 a year into your 401k, that's great, two thumbs up. Do it immediately. Okay, so have it taken out of your paycheck immediately and just completely forget about it because it's easy, or excuse me, it's difficult to miss something you never had, right? So that's probably the best way to do it. That would be my advice to you, and you could tell your clients that, or your friends, or if they're asking about this. Employees often just elect a percentage reduction. So if you do want that 10,000, you just say, well, how much of that is is of my percentage wise, right? So if you're making 100 a year, then it'll be 10%. Making 50 a year, it's 20%, right? And then the employee always has, I say access to their contributions. All right. So let's say that you have an employer who will match dollar for dollar, so 100% up to 5% of your salary. If you make $100,000 a year, you put in $5,000 a year, so 5%. They will match that in your 401k. In their portfolio, you have $10,000, okay, valued assets. You always have access to your 5,000, but you won't always have access to your employer's 5,000. Okay. We oftentimes see what are called vesting schedules. Okay. So some employers have immediate vesting. So the first year you're there, you do have access to that. Others might have a 3-year vesting schedule. Some might have a 4 or 5-year tier schedule. By law, you have access to your employer contributions after 5 years, no matter what. So they can't make it be more than 5 years. So after you have 5 years of your tenure there, you have access to your employer's contributions. Okay. So speaking of employer contributions, how do they often work? Formula matching, which is exact. So this is the exact same example I just gave you. We'll match 100% up to 5% of your salary. So that person making $100,000 a year, they put 5% in. That's 5,000. The employer matches that another 5% for a total of 10%, which is $10,000. Now, discretionary matching, this requires a little more work, but it might be beneficial to those firms that want to incentivize certain, kind of incentivize certain things they're important to their business, or maybe they don't always have the ability to match. Maybe they think that some of their employees don't really care so much for the matching, they'd rather just have more salary. So it gives a few more options. It's not as common. You often see formula matching. Pure discretionary or profit sharing, so this is set towards goals. So if we have excess amounts of 100,000 in total, we're going to allocate that evenly based on salary percentage. So if we have $100,000, we're going to put into everyone's kind of retirement portfolio, their 401k, really as value. You choose the portfolio. If we want to put this $100,000 in, it's just going to be based on salary. So if you have, you make 10%, of the total gross salary for the company, which is really good, then you would get 10 grand of this put into your 401k. Now the last one, formula contributions. These are quite nice, and they often come with immediate vesting. So the employer contributes a flat percentage with no matching required. So for example, Ball State, when you first start out, they give you a formula contribution of 5%. So I don't have to put anything into my retirement, and they will still every year give me 5%. What's even more interesting is after 3 years, they move it up to 10.5%. So really, really good benefits. And that's more of an artifact of it being a state school. So when you go into private industry, you tend to not see this as much, but you might see, more raises, than you would in a government institution. Okay. So those are some of the ways we would see employers contribute. Now, what about distributions? So the first thing, if you hit retirement age, okay, so 59.5 or higher, if you actually retire, okay, you're good to go. If you pass away, there are survivorship benefits. Okay, so you wouldn't get the money, but someone else would. Disability, for the most part, is allowable as far as the distribution is concerned. And then with hardship, we'll talk about that just in a second. You can often get access to all of the funds then. Early withdrawals, however, are penalized. So it's 10% of the total taxable amount. Okay, and you also have to pay taxes on that. Okay, so it's not advisable to pull out of your 401k, because you lose a good bit of kind of the best things about it. Okay. Now, what about hardship withdrawals? So there are a few regulations here. The two primary, I'd say necessary conditions here is that you have to be considered immediate, or the needs have to be considered immediate and heavy. So if your home, you don't have homeowners insurance and it explodes or something like that, okay. If you have a terminal illness, that's usually, a pretty good one as well. As far as argument, I mean, it's terrible, but it's a good argument if you have a terminal illness. And or if you can't get funds from other sources. Okay. So yes, you could have a terminal illness or disability, but there's disability insurance. Okay. So it can oftentimes cover that and would supersede, and then your survivors would just get the 401k balance. Okay. So some examples here: extreme medical expenses, extreme home repair purchase. There are some tuition waivers, eviction, and then funeral expenses. Again, that will be after death. So that would be to help your survivors, your children or spouses or spouse. I guess you can have more than one spouse. So how does this work? Okay, so once the money is kind of in the pool, okay, it's invested. So it doesn't sit as cash. It's losing money then, right? It's losing purchasing power. So it doesn't just sit as cash. So the employee is not taxed on the original contributions, unless it's a Roth plan. They're not taxed on the contributions or interest accrual. Okay, so you get to choose between some investments and variants. So let's talk about investments. Okay, in qualified plans, they're often pooled. So you have all employee funds. You have access to bonds, money markets, stocks, and other relatively liquid funds. You can choose directed investment. So the employer could do this, in which it's kind of more streamlined and hand guided. This can be safer, but it comes with higher cost. And a lot of these, pooled or other types of investment plans will let individuals say, all right, well, I want to use this index fund. And some index fund or target funds can be, played out based on the age and the risk preference. But with all that, with that little bit of, I don't want to say hand holding, with that guidance comes cost. Okay. All right, some other variants. Okay, so you can have a Roth 401k. Okay, the good thing about a Roth 401k or a Roth 457b or a 403b is that they don't have income limitations like a Roth IRA. They also have higher limits than a Roth IRA. So what I mean by that, if you look at the Roth IRA video, with a Roth, if you make more than $140,000, you can't do a Roth IRA. Okay, you can do a backdoor Roth, but you can't do a standard Roth IRA. So you don't have that option. Okay, that's not true for a Roth 401k, a Roth 403b, or a Roth 457b. There are no income limitations. On top of that, all IRAs, Roth or non-Roth, are limited at $6,000 per year. Not for a 401k. So if you have access to a Roth 401k, you can put $19,500 post-tax, and just let it accrue interest over time, and you won't be taxed on that. And every dollar in there when you retire is yours to have because you've already paid tax on it. So that's pretty nice too. And especially if you think that tax rates are lower now than they will be in the future, which is fair because they are really low right now, then that might not be a bad option. Okay. From a risk management perspective, it's probably best to diversify a little bit. So have some Roth and have some non-Roth. Okay. So you have some that are pre-tax, some that are post-tax. And that would just be, again, a simple diversification tool between two options. Okay. A simple 401k is a little bit more streamlined. It's for smaller firms, and they're exempt from non-discrimination rules just because they're so small. It's very difficult to, if you want to offer, if you have less than 100 employees, but almost all of them are part-time, then it's going to be hard to offer a good, full 401k or a standard 401k to just the 10 full-time employees. Okay, so that's somewhat beneficial, and that's what a simple 401k allows you to do. A defined benefit, so DB, defined benefit K plan. was instituted. These came about 20 years ago, 2003, 2004, when they were being kind of pushed. And the argument from kind of lawmakers and policymakers is that, look, we don't have a lot of defined benefit plans. So let's try to push this as kind of a way. So a defined benefit plan just tells you once you retire, you get this benefit. Okay. So it's not so much that contribution matching is defined, the benefits at the end are defined. It doesn't look like these are being taken up that much for a number of reasons that we'll cover once we talk about defined benefit plans. Now, other tax implications to keep in mind here. Okay. So the employee deferrals up to the annual limit are not taxed. So up to 19,500, as long as it's not a Roth 401k, no tax for the employee. Okay, the employer, their contributions up to 25% of total payroll. Again, they can't just say, all right, we're just going to give everybody, we're going to boost 401k contributions up, to just an exorbitant amount to 50% of payroll. We don't have to pay taxes on any of that. So really, it's just mitigating or lessening the chance that they're kind of use it as a tax avoidance scheme. Okay, and then elected deferrals from employers are subject to FICA and really any other types of taxes they would have to pay. Okay, so you can't get around all taxes, right? So this is a little bit better from the tax side. It's a little bit better for the employee, right? Because the employer, if we pay them in cash right now, that's still part of payroll. Okay, so that's still tax deductible. For the employee, when they get paid, no, they're taxed then and there. But for these types of referrals and most other benefits package other than salary and Roth retirement plans, we're not taxed until later, so we get to defer those taxes. And again, that is ideal if you think that maybe taxes would be lower in the future. Okay. All right, and that's it. That's the basic overview of 401k plans. We'll go into more detail as we move forward in the semester, but hope you have a good morning, good afternoon, good night. Thank you.